My name is Lena and I died on a cold, unforgiving night, swept out of the only home I had ever known. The life I had built, the family I had served had collectively decided I was disposable. As I took my last ragged breath on the dusty street, my mind replayed the scenes of my betrayal like a broken record. I had spent the first half of my life serving my in-laws, Arthur and Beatrice. They were not unkind, merely demanding, and I, a young bride eager to please, believed that devotion was the currency of love. I cooked, I cleaned, I tended to their every ache and complaint. Then my son Leo was born. My world narrowed to the three of them. I poured every ounce of my strength into our household, believing I was building a legacy, a family fortress that would shelter me in my old age. I waited for my husband, David, to return from his military service. I pictured our reunion, a quiet celebration of our endurance. I never imagined he would return with a delicate, coquettish woman named Clara and her pretty daughter, Sophie. The moment I saw them, a chill settled in my bones. While I had been running myself ragged, my husband had been building a life with another woman far away. The whispers started first, then became open demands. Arthur and Beatrice, who had eaten my food for decades, urged me to be reasonable and grant David a divorce. My own daughter-in-law, Sarah, looked at me with pitying eyes that held no real compassion. But the final shattering blow came from Leo, the boy I had raised with my own two hands. He grabbed me by the collar, his face a mask of contempt I didn't recognize. "Mom, you're not good enough for Dad. He deserves better," he spat, his words like shards of glass in my heart. "In love, the one who isn't loved is the real third party. You've already ruined half of Dad's life. You can't keep delaying the rest of it." They blamed me for not being pretty enough, for lacking education, for being scheming. They said my years of service were merely a calculated investment in David's future success. In the end, Leo pressed my hand onto the divorce agreement, forcing a red ink handprint that felt like a brand of shame. I shook all over, a tight, searing pain seizing my heart. The betrayal, not from one but from all of them, killed me. When I opened my eyes again, the world was both familiar and strange. The musty scent of the house, the sound of Arthur's labored breathing from his sickbed, it was all the same. But I was different. I was young again. I looked at my hands, smooth and unlined. I rushed to the small mirror. The face staring back was my own, but from 20 years ago. Disorientation gave way to a dawning, terrifying understanding. I had been given a second chance. Arthur was paralyzed in bed just as he had been before. Beatrice's eyes were clouded with age, her sight failing. Leo was a wailing infant in his crib. David was still stationed away. And Clara and her daughter Sophie were still living next door. The narrative was already being woven. They said the man of that household had died. So it was only right that our family give them extra help, Beatrice told me, her tone implying I was petty for any hesitation. "You shouldn't be so petty, Lena." Petty? Yes, why should I pen myself into endless chores out of pettiness? The question which had once shamed me now felt like a key. In my past life it had locked me in. In this one it would set me free. The first test came sooner than I expected. David came home on leave. He was just as I remembered him, tall, upright, his army uniform crisp, his bearing radiating a righteousness that I now saw as arrogance. He brought with him a piece of pork, a luxury I had queued a day and a night to buy to nourish his parents and his son, and he gave it to Clara. When I confronted him, his voice was a circle of calm, infuriating logic. "Lena, do you really have to lose your temper? Clara just lost her husband. She's raising her child alone and can only do needlework to make ends meet. Look how thin that child is. Can you really bear it? When my comrade passed, I promised him I would look after them. Do you want to put me in a position of disloyalty and dishonor?" I clutched my chest, the ghost of that fatal heart pain echoing. I saw it all again, the forced divorce, my son's contempt. I drew several deep breaths, my eyes smarting red. When I looked up, David was giving me a solemn lecture, his gaze averted with that same righteous certainty. I didn't answer. I couldn't be bothered to argue. That piece of pork represented my old life. A life of sacrifice that went unnoticed and unappreciated. I turned and walked out. Beatrice called my name. Leo, now a toddler, shouted, "Mom," and ran after me. I ignored them. Even when he fell, split his chin and wailed without stopping, I didn't halt my steps. My heart, once so soft for him, had hardened into a shield. I jogged all the way to the factory, arriving just before the gates closed. I found the director, Mr. Abrams, in his office. "You sure you want to join the Northwest Development Project?" he asked, incredulous. "I am," I said, my voice firm and clear, surprising even myself. He frowned. "Does David know about this?" "He doesn't need to," I replied. "My affairs are mine to decide." Mr. Abrams was startled. "But your boy is only 4 or 5. Can you really leave him?" I nodded, a profound certainty settling within me. "There's nothing I can't leave. I only want to contribute my strength to my country. Don't you always say that only when there's the greater family can there be the smaller one? The Northwest needs me now. I must go without hesitation, or I'll be letting down the revolutionary forebears." It was the perfect, unassailable argument. He tried to dissuade me, reminding me that once I went, I might not return for years, and that David might not allow it. I lifted the corners of my lips in a calm, determined smile. "Don't worry, Director. No one can stop me from dedicating myself to building this country." In the end, he accepted my transfer request. When I returned home, the house was full of chatter. From the doorway, I saw Clara sitting on a bench with Sophie, chatting and laughing happily with David. Arthur was lying in bed. Beatrice sat beside him, joining the conversation, while little Leo was offering his precious white rabbit candy to Sophie. It was a scene of perfect, stolen harmony. As soon as I stepped inside, the lively atmosphere froze. Clara was the first to rise. She handed me the piece of pork with a gentle, practiced smile. "Sister-in-law, this is the meat David brought this morning. I didn't want it to go to waste since I can't cook it well, so I thought I'd bring it to you. I also brought some eggs and chives. Please use them to nourish the elders and the child." I didn't reach out. I simply walked toward the inner room. David furrowed his brows. "Go make dinner. Let Claire and Sophie stay and eat with us. Cook more rice." I looked at him, my face a placid mask. "I've already eaten. I'm not hungry. Whoever wants to eat can cook." The entire room went still. David couldn't hide the reproach in his tone. "You've eaten, but my parents, our son and Clara and her daughter haven't. How can you be so irresponsible?" A faint, cold laugh escaped my lips. "They are your parents and your son, David. I've been in this family for more than 5 years, cooking 3 meals a day every day. Why should I be the one to exhaust myself serving all of you while you just sit and wait for hot food? Do you not have hands or feet?" He stood up, his tall frame suddenly stripped of all the shine I once thought he had. "Lena, are you cooking or not?" "Not." I turned and went straight into the bedroom. After working all day, I was tired. I needed to rest, to restore my strength for the new life I had chosen. My energy, my effort, my intelligence. None of it would be wasted on this household ever again. In the end, that piece of pork I had queued a whole day and night to buy was fried into a salty, greasy lump by Clara. But pork was still pork, and no matter how poorly cooked, it was eaten with 2 bowls of rice by everyone but me. As I lay in bed, listening to the clatter of dishes and the murmur of their voices, I felt not anger but a quiet, steely resolve. This was only the beginning. The days that followed my declaration of independence were a study in quiet chaos. I had drawn a line in the sand, and the entire household seemed to be teetering on its edge. I completely stopped cooking. The first morning, Beatrice shuffled into the kitchen, her clouded eyes blinking in confusion at the cold, empty stove. "Lena, what is the meaning of this?" she asked, her voice thin with age and irritation. "I am not this family's servant," I replied, my tone even and firm. I was tying the laces on my work boots, not looking at her. "If you want to eat, cook for yourselves or eat out. Just don't bother me." Arthur wheezed a protest from his bed, a guttural sound of entitlement that I no longer felt obligated to answer. Little Leo, sensing the tension, began to wail. In my past life, his cries would have been a summons I couldn't ignore. Now they were just noise. Let him cry. Once he's exhausted, his tears will dry. The thought was cold, but it was the only way to armor my heart against the boy who would one day become my betrayer. David began coming home on time every day, a new and unsettling pattern. He tried to reason with me, his arguments a blend of guilt and patriarchal expectation. "A woman's place is to manage the home, Lena. You're neglecting your duties. My parents are suffering. Your son is suffering." To avoid these circular arguments, I volunteered for every overtime shift available at the factory. The whirring of the machinery was a welcome symphony compared to the accusatory silence at home. My absence, however, created a vacuum, and Clara was all too eager to fill it. She started buying groceries and letting herself into my house, taking over the cooking and the care of Leo. It was a masterful performance. She would bathe the boy with a show of tender affection, cooing to him in a way that made Beatrice sigh with approval. She would cook simple, often poorly executed meals, but the mere act of her doing it painted me as the neglectful shrew. David saw it all and admired her even more for her selfless efforts. He saw her struggling to lift a heavy pot and would rush to her aid, his chivalry a stark contrast to the indifference he showed my own decades of backbreaking labor. I stayed out as late as I could, letting the star-crossed pair cultivate their feelings, letting my son experience a stepmother's love, and letting my in-laws enjoy being pampered by a beautiful young woman. If Clara truly could shoulder those responsibilities, I could finally relax. But I knew the truth. She had been born into a semblance of privilege, coddled and never taught true resilience. She couldn't lift or carry. She nearly set the kitchen on fire trying to fry an egg. Washing clothes left her hands swollen with allergies until they looked like bloated, red sausages. The chores piled up, day after day, and every eye in the house turned back to me, expecting me to finally break and resume my role. The words they spoke were always the same, a broken record of societal pressure. Which family's daughter-in-law doesn't do these things? You're being unfilial. David shouldn't have to put up with this. How can you, as his mother, be so heartless as not to feed him a single bite? My mother-in-law scolded me one evening, holding a fussing Leo in her arms. I looked at my son crying and felt not the slightest ripple in my heart. My in-laws were never my parents, and even my son was someone I could choose to let go of. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. The more I neglected the house, the more David had no choice but to deal with his parents and our child himself. He was a soldier, not a caretaker, and the strain began to show on his face. He was soft-hearted, unable to bear the sight of his parents in discomfort or his son in distress, and this forced him into a domestic role he despised. One evening I returned home later than usual. The house was quiet. To my surprise, David was waiting for me at the small kitchen table. On it were 2 plates, one with half a portion of braised ribs, another with stir-fried greens. He brought over a steaming bowl of rice and placed it in front of me. "Come eat," he said, his voice low. I glanced warily toward the inner room. "They're all asleep," he said quickly, catching my meaning. "Our son kept calling for you." I had to tell him stories for 2 hours before he finally settled. I didn't want to engage and was about to wash up and go to bed, but he stopped me. I asked at the factory. "There was no dinner served at the cafeteria tonight. I know you're angry with me, but there's no need to punish your own body." His words, for a fleeting moment, hit me right in the heart. He sounded concerned, almost like the man I had once loved. And he was right. Why should I ruin my health for his sake? My stomach was burning with hunger. I walked to the table, sat down, and put a rib into my mouth. The flavor was simple, a little oversalted, but it was food. As soon as I took a bite, David let out a long sigh. "Lena, these years have been hard on you. It's my fault for letting you suffer so much." So David knew how to reflect after all. Perhaps he was finally understanding the exhausting, invisible labor of serving an entire household. A tiny, foolish flicker of hope ignited within me. "I've been thinking a lot," he continued, leaning forward. "You're working and looking after the family too. It's too much for one person, so I want to discuss something with you. Why don't you quit your job?" The flicker died instantly, extinguished by the cold water of déjà vu. Here it comes. I knew that meal wouldn't go down easily. Soon Leo will start elementary school. He'll need help with his studies. My parents' health is getting worse every day. If you quit, you can focus on the house and won't be so overworked. In my last life, he had persuaded me with these same honeyed words. And what happened? As soon as I quit, he brought Clara in to replace me. They were inseparable day and night. And in the end, they seized the chance to join the Northwest Development together, running off to the frontier while I was left without a job, caring for the entire family by scrubbing clothes for others until my hands were covered in chilblains and thick calluses. I sneered at him, the taste of the pork turning to ash in my mouth. "But your parents would rather have their sons stay by their side. Our salaries are about the same, aren't they? Whoever earns money, it's all the same. Why don't you quit instead? I'll provide for the family." David's expression changed instantly, his features hardening. I'm a man. How could I let a woman support the family? I laughed, a low, bitter sound. That's right. You're a man and you don't need a woman to support the family. But tell me, where has your salary gone all these years? Did you give it to this household? His voice faltered and a shadow of guilt crossed his eyes. I've been saving it. When it's needed, I'll bring it out. I set down my chopsticks, went into our bedroom and returned with a small locked iron box. I opened it and pulled out David's bank book, tossing it in front of him on the table. Every month you get paid and every month the money disappears. What did you spend it on? Can you explain? Or should I ask where you've really been keeping it? Can you show me the money? David stayed silent, his jaw tight. I answered for him. You gave it all to Clara and her daughter, didn't you? That's why they can eat meat at every meal, wear new clothes every day, while your wife has worn shoes with holes in the soles for 2 years without being able to replace them. Your son wants milk powder, but he can only cling pitifully to your father. Buying a wheelchair for him is impossible. And taking your mother to the hospital for her eyes is also impossible. David, your so-called filial piety is nothing more than empty words. Every day you talk about it, but in reality, you just leave it to me to fulfill your duty for you. His frown deepened, yet he still spoke with that infuriating self-righteousness. Clara's husband died. They have no source of income. If I don't help them, am I supposed to just watch them starve? I sneered. So keep giving your entire salary to Clara and her daughter. I couldn't care less. But when you've already handed them all the money and I'm left without a job, what is this family supposed to eat? Grass? Dirt? His face flushed a deep, mottled red. He held his breath, unable to speak a word. After a long, tense silence, he looked at me, his eyes searching my face as if seeing a stranger. What's wrong with you lately? You used to nod at whatever I said, agree to whatever I did. Now look at you, arguing with me, defying me. Where's the obedient wife you used to be? Yes, in the past I had been meek. Because I had loved this man, I had yielded to him in everything, only hoping he would remember my goodness and return some measure of love. But now I saw through it all. The more you grovel and beg for affection, the less people value you. So I reached into the iron box once more and took out the divorce papers I had already prepared and hidden there. I laid them on the table between the half-eaten plates of food. Sign them. I want a divorce. You're free to pursue the one you truly love. When David saw the black and white words, divorce agreement, he shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. Nonsense. I looked at him calmly, my heart a still, cold lake. Is it nonsense? You know best. Your heart was never with me. I never received any love from you. You like Claire. You want to give her a home? Fine. I'll step aside and let you. He slammed his palm down on the table, making the dishes and bowls clatter loudly. How many times do I have to explain? It's only comradeship, only sympathy. There's nothing improper between me and Clara. We're clean. Clean. I laughed coldly. And what does your clean mean? That you haven't slept together yet? Haven't kissed, embraced, or held hands? Spare me. I didn't argue further. The time for words was over. It was time for him to hear the truth from someone else. Instead of responding, I stood up, opened the front door, and motioned for him to follow me into the cool night air. The battle for my future had just begun, and I was no longer fighting to keep my family. I was fighting to be free of it. I led a confused and angry David out of our apartment and into the shared courtyard of our housing block. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of our kitchen. He started to protest, but I held a finger to my lips and gestured for him to follow me to the window of our neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was one of the few families on the block who owned a television, and her home was a nightly gathering place for the local wives, a hub of both entertainment and information. Lena, what is this foolishness? David whispered harshly. Shoo, I hissed. You want to know what clean looks like to the outside world? Listen. We crouched beneath the slightly open window. The flickering blue light from the TV set spilled out, and the familiar sounds of the nightly news broadcast mixed with the murmurs of the women inside. For a few minutes, there was only the drone of the newsreader. Then, as I knew it would, the conversation turned. Did you see her today? That Clara woman was wearing another new outfit. Such a delicate shade of pink. Looks expensive, one voice said. I recognized it as Mrs. Gable's. Ordered custom from the county, she told me. Isn't it ridiculous? Another woman, Mrs. Finch, chimed in. Her husband's dead, yet she's living better than when he was alive. Poor Lena. Marrying such a useless man. My breath caught. David stiffened beside me. Exactly, Mrs. Gable continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Lena works hard at the factory. She's one of the best. At home she can manage everything neatly. But David, that shameless bastard, is out messing around with another woman. Looks respectable on the outside in that uniform, but inside he's trash. I've wanted to tell Lena to just divorce him already. She's still young and beautiful and her income is good. Plenty of men are waiting for her. I've got relatives who visit every New Year, and they always ask if Lena's divorced yet so they can pursue her. I heard David's sharp intake of breath. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the dusty ground, letting the words sink in. As for Clara, she's trouble, Mrs. Finch added, her voice lowering conspiratorially. When her husband was alive, she was already flirting with other men. Now that he's gone, she's even bolder about it. And David, that blind fool, ignores Lena and treats Clara like a treasure. These past few days, haven't you noticed? Mrs. Gable said. Lena's been working overtime. She's not cooking or washing clothes at home anymore. It really seems like she's serious about divorce. When I get the chance, I'll talk to her too. Tell her to be firm. This isn't feudal times anymore. A woman who divorces can still hold up the sky on her own. Yes, I'll encourage her and even introduce her to some relatives, Mrs. Finch agreed eagerly. Let David regret it. Aside from his looks and his army job, he has nothing worth bragging about. His parents are half dead and no decent girl would want to be burdened with them. Just wait. If David really marries Clara, their days will turn into a mess. They'll probably divorce eventually. Clara's a troublemaker. No matter who she's with, the marriage won't last. The women continued, their gossip painting a picture far more damning than anything I could have ever said. They talked and talked until I grew sleepy. Thinking about work the next day, I had no more patience to keep crouching with David, listening to the brutal public verdict on his character. I stood up, my knees cracking, and headed home without a backward glance. David followed me, his face a thundercloud. The righteous certainty he had carried just minutes before seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind a shaken and silent man. Back inside, I washed up quickly and lay down, falling asleep almost immediately, the strange exhaustion of emotional liberation washing over me. He sat by the bed for a long time and I could feel his gaze on me. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but seeing that I had no intention of responding, he eventually gave up and lay down, the space between us in the bed feeling like a chasm. The next morning we moved around each other in a stiff, wordless routine. As we left for work, we ran into Clara at the entrance to our building. She was dressed in a new light blue tunic, her hair neatly braided. She started to greet me with that saccharine sister-in-law, but I walked straight past her as if she were invisible. Instead, she turned her attention to David, her voice a sweet, hopeful chime. David. To my astonishment, David only glanced at her, his expression cold and closed off, and then walked right past her as well. He fell into step beside me. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Clara's face, her pretty features twisting into a mask of wounded resentment. We walked side by side in silence for a block. Then I felt him tug at my sleeve. He unwound the thick wool scarf from his own neck and draped it around mine, his fingers briefly brushing my chin. I froze, stunned by the unfamiliar gesture. Then he pulled 2 boiled eggs from his pocket and pressed them into my hand. They were still warm. I made these before you woke up, he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. From now on, I'll make them for you every day. I stared at the eggs in my palm, symbols of a domestic care he had never before offered. You don't need to do this, I said flatly. He drew a deep breath, his gaze finally meeting mine, and for the first time I saw something that looked like genuine sincerity. I was wrong before. I let you suffer. From now on I'll change. Let's live well together. Then he pulled something else from his pocket, a small, thick envelope. He stuffed it along with the eggs into my hands. This is my salary for the month. Keep it. From now on I'll bring home every cent. Without waiting for my reply, he turned and walked briskly toward the direction of his unit, his tall, upright back looking strangely vulnerable. I stood there on the sidewalk, clutching the warm eggs and the envelope of money, a tangle of emotions warring inside me. It was too little too late, and yet, a part of me, the ghost of the woman I used to be, felt a treacherous flicker of hope. It was shattered by a sharp, bitter voice. No matter what tricks you used to drive David away from me, you can't change the fact that he has me in his heart. Clara was standing a few feet away, glaring at the eggs and the money in my arms, her face pale with fury. All these years, David has given me his salary and his eggs. You've only gotten them once. We still have a long future together. Her arrogance, her sheer audacity, snapped me out of my confusion. I curved my lips into a mocking smile. Just then several neighbors, including Mrs. Gable, stepped out into the courtyard. I deliberately raised my voice, making sure every word carried. "Oh, so my husband gives you eggs to eat every day? So all this time he's been handing you his salary every month. No wonder he never brought a single penny home." I held up the eggs in the envelope. "Well then, these eggs and this money, he asked me to pass them on to you. As long as you eat well and live well, he can finally be at ease." The effect was instantaneous. The surrounding neighbors stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide, then fixed on Clara with dawning understanding and disgust. Clara's cheeks flushed a scarlet red. The arrogance she had shown moments before evaporated, replaced by panic. "You're making things up," she cried, her voice shrill. "David and I are completely innocent." I widened my eyes, mocking her innocence. "Really? Then where did you get the money to buy a new outfit every 3 to 5 days? If it wasn't from my husband, was it from some other man?" Her face twisted. "Lena, don't you dare try to dump that filth on me." I shook my head slowly, clicking my tongue in mock pity. "How sad for my husband, thinking of you in his heart, talking about you with his lips. Married to me but still carrying on with another woman." Then I turned toward Mrs. Gable. "Sisters, Clara says she has nothing to do with my husband. Then tell me, where does all her money come from for this comfortable life? Which man gave you money because he fancied you?" Mrs. Gable and the other women immediately frowned, their eyes toward Clara filling with open disdain. They no longer bothered with courtesy and walked right up to her, forming a small, angry circle. One of them, a large woman named Betty, spat harshly, "Shameless. Daring to act but too cowardly to admit it." Clara tried to defend herself, her voice trembling. "Sisters, don't listen to Lena's nonsense. You all know what kind of person I am." They sneered. "Yes, we know you too well," Mrs. Gable said coldly. "When your husband had just died, you were already sending handkerchiefs to mine. Don't think we didn't notice what you were up to. Only a fool like David would fall for your tricks." Clara's eyes reddened, tears threatening to fall, but the women no longer held back. "You only dare bully Lena, thinking she's easy to push around," Betty snarled, getting right in Clara's face. "Let me warn you. Don't you dare pull those tricks in front of my husband. If you do, I'll slash you with a knife." At that threat, Clara physically recoiled, trembling in fear. The collective judgment of the courtyard, the stench of exposed scandal, seemed to choke her. Mrs. Gable slipped her arm through mine, her face set in a grim line of solidarity. "Come on, Lena. Go. I've got something to tell you anyway. Let's see how long she can keep up her act." Together we walked toward the factory, leaving Clara standing there alone in the middle of the courtyard, completely and utterly abandoned by the very society whose opinion she had once manipulated so skillfully. The battle lines had been redrawn, and for the first time I wasn't fighting alone. For about half a month, a fragile, unprecedented peace settled over the household. David came home on time almost every day. He no longer lectured me or made demands. Instead, he made awkward attempts at small talk, asking about my work or commenting on the weather. After dinner, he would even gather the dishes and wash them himself, his large soldier's hands clumsy with the soap and sponge. I was more than happy to let him. This was the bare minimum, and I refused to reward it with gratitude. I continued my routine. Work, overtime, a silent return home. After freshening up, I went straight to bed. David would lie down beside me, and several times I felt him tense, starting to speak, only to swallow his words back down. In the dark, I could feel the turmoil radiating from him. No one knew what was turning in his mind: remorse, calculation, or simply a bruised ego from the neighborhood gossip. I didn't care enough to ask. Clara predictably did not give up. She came by the house a few times, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading, looking for David. To his credit, during this period he turned her away with a coldness that seemed to genuinely shock her. He would stand at the door, his body blocking her entry, and murmur a few terse words I couldn't hear before closing it firmly. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, whose poor eyesight seemed to sharpen her other senses, noticed the shift. She took my arm one afternoon as I was heading out, her gnarled fingers surprisingly strong. "David still loves you the most," she said, her voice a low, wheedling whisper. "You shouldn't keep blaming him. Come home earlier. Share the household burdens with him. As long as you're united, life will turn out fine." I gave no response, simply extricating my arm and continuing on my way. In my heart, I knew this calm was only the eye of the storm. A woman like Clara, who had built her survival on manipulating a man like David, would not relinquish her prize so easily. Her resources were dwindling and desperation would make her bold. Another month slipped by, and then the list for the Northwest Development Project was finally posted on the factory bulletin board. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring and pointing. My eyes scanned the typed names and there it was, Lena Petrova. A wave of visceral relief, so powerful it made my knees weak, washed over me. It was real. My escape route was confirmed. The news traveled fast. David heard it that same afternoon, and when he returned home his face was like a thundercloud. The tentative peace of the past weeks shattered in an instant. "If you go northwest, does that mean you're abandoning me and this family?" he demanded, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and something that sounded like panic. I met his gaze steadily, having prepared for this very question. "Your unit should also have positions for the development project. Apply for one. We can take our child and your parents with us. Over there, housing and meals are provided, and the apartment is twice the size of this one. If we go together, life will be better than here." It was a genuine offer, a final test. If he chose us, chose a future that offered tangible improvement for everyone, perhaps the ghost of our past life could be laid to rest. He clenched his jaw, the muscle twitching. "I can't go." "Why not?" I countered, my voice dangerously calm. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting away from mine. He looked trapped. I gave a cold, mirthless laugh. "You can't bear to leave Clara and her daughter, can you? Without you here, they might not even survive." It was as if I had ripped the words from his throat. "There's nothing between me and Rachel," he blurted out, the old defensiveness returning in a rush. "My salary, I've given it to you. I haven't even seen her recently. Why can't you be more generous?" His hypocrisy was breathtaking. My eyes fell on his forearm, where a fresh, angry red burn mark was visible just below his rolled-up sleeve. I pointed at it. "That's from a soldering iron, isn't it?" He quickly tugged down his sleeve, a guilty flush spreading up his neck. "No, it's not." But I knew. Mrs. Gable and some of the other women had visited his unit during a recent open day. They had seen him there working late with a soldering iron on some side project. They'd later told me, their voices laced with pity, what they had learned from the other soldiers. It was grueling, unauthorized side work, exhausting and harsh, but it paid well, more than his army wages each month. "And that extra money," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper, "you never gave to me. Must have gone straight to her. To buy more of those custom-made dresses. To put meat on her table every single day while your son makes do with gruel." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. I had laid his secret, shameful sacrifices for another woman bare in the middle of our kitchen. He had no defense, no righteous argument that could stand against the evidence of his own burned skin and my cold, knowing gaze. I had no more patience for a man who had learned to lie so easily, even to himself. I turned and went straight into the bedroom, closing the door on his stunned silence. I needed to rest. In a month I would be gone. I lay down, but sleep was elusive. Not long after, I heard my in-laws calling David to their room. Our house was so small, so flimsy, that every word drifted clearly through the thin wall. For the first time in their lives, Arthur and Beatrice were scolding their golden boy. We didn't say anything before because life was still steady enough. Arthur's voice was a reedy, labored rasp. But Lena has already made her stance so clear. "You can't keep dragging this out. You can't have everything both ways. Look at this family situation," Beatrice continued, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. "If you really end up with that Claire, your parents won't last long. That woman isn't the type who can keep a household. Son, wake up. Haven't these past months been hard enough on you? Arthur wheezed. Half dead, covered in injuries. Was it worth it all for one woman? Live properly with Lena, Beatrice pleaded. Don't waste your thoughts on what shouldn't be. They were old, their bodies failing, but their judgment, when their own comfort was at stake, was suddenly sharp and merciless. They could see the cliff edge approaching, and they were desperately trying to pull him and by extension themselves back from it. I listened, a strange, detached observer to the unraveling of their illusions about their son. After a whole night of their relentless persuasion, a weary, defeated David finally emerged the next morning. He looked exhausted, the weight of his parents' expectations and the ruin of his own romantic fantasy bowing his shoulders. He found me packing a small bag with essential documents. I'll do it, he said, his voice hollow. I'll apply for the transfer. We'll go west together. I nodded, saying nothing. It was the logical, sensible choice. But David, could he really make it? Could he truly sever the invisible strings Clara had tied around his heart? I had my doubts, but for the sake of a peaceful departure, I kept them to myself. His application for the transfer was submitted. For a few days, a tense, hopeful quiet descended. We were a family preparing for a great migration, a fresh start. I almost allowed myself to believe it. Then the news came, delivered by a breathless neighbor boy. It was as inevitable as the turning of the earth. Clara had attempted to end her life. The carefully constructed facade of David's resolve crumbled into dust. Even someone as usually controlled as he was lost all composure. The color drained from his face, and without a single word to me, without even grabbing his jacket, he turned and ran. He ran out of the house, out of the courtyard, and straight to Clara's home. He carried her in his arms to the hospital, a dramatic public display of his devotion. The whole neighborhood saw it. Barely alive, Clara clung to him, her tears streaming down her face, her voice a weak, trembling thread of sound that everyone strained to hear. David, don't leave me. I'll be good. I'll listen. I won't interfere with your family. Please don't go. I beg you. Don't leave me. Her pleas were so pitiful, so perfectly calculated, that even as a bystander, one could feel a tug of sympathy. How much more so for David, who was right there in the middle of the drama, holding her fragile, desperate body. And so, inevitably, I heard David's voice, loud and clear, an oath spoken for the entire building to witness. I won't go. I won't leave. Hold on. We'll be at the hospital soon. Don't worry. I'll take care of you and your daughter. That promise, spoken like a vow, echoed through the courtyard. Every neighbor who heard it frowned deeply, their earlier sympathy for him evaporating, replaced by a fresh wave of contempt for his weakness. When the ambulance arrived, David climbed in with Clara, not once looking back toward our home. I stood at our doorway, Mrs. Gable and the other women gathering around me, a silent, furious guard of honor. They waited for my reaction, for tears, for collapse. Mrs. Gable opened her mouth to comfort me, but I spoke first, my voice surprisingly steady. Sisters, don't worry. I'm not sad. Not in the least. I looked at each of their concerned faces. In fact, I hope you'll all bear witness for me. David wronged me first. When I file for divorce, I'll trouble you all to support me. Mrs. Gable's face hardened with resolve. Don't worry, sister. A man like that will regret it sooner or later. Divorce if you must. Sometimes it's the only way forward. The others all murmured their agreement, their support a tangible force around me. And I felt a warmth spread in my chest. I was not alone. My path was clear, and it led away from this man, this house, this life of endless betrayal. The final act was about to begin. David spent a full week at the hospital with Clara. During that time, without consulting me, he formally withdrew his application for the Northwest Development Project. The news was delivered to me by a sympathetic, tight-lipped Mr. Abrams at the factory. My own transfer, however, remained approved. The director had seen enough, heard enough, to know where the right and wrong of the situation lay. When David finally returned home, he did not come alone. He ignored the stony, judgmental stares of the neighbors and carried a convalescing Clara directly into our house. He settled her onto the very bench where I had first seen her laughing with him, and he began to wait on her hand and foot. He cooked her broths, fetched her water, and adjusted her pillows with a tenderness he had never shown me, even in our best days. It was a brazen, breathtaking act, a flag planted squarely in the ruins of our marriage. Yet even then, in the face of this ultimate humiliation, he refused to file for divorce. Instead, he cornered me in the kitchen, his eyes pleading yet stubborn. "Even if you don't go northwest, we won't divorce," he said, his voice low and intense. "Just believe me when I say there's nothing between me and Clara. I swear in this life I will never betray you." It was so laughable I almost couldn't find the breath to respond. After carrying another woman into our home, after publicly vowing to care for her, after withdrawing from our future together for her sake, he still had the audacity to claim there was nothing between them and to swear fidelity. Did he truly believe that as long as he hadn't technically slept with her, it didn't count as betrayal? The mental gymnastics were astounding. Mrs. Gable and the other women, however, had reached their limit. They couldn't stand seeing David's galling irresponsibility and were determined not to let me be dragged down with him. They united, a formidable army of righteous indignation. They began going to Clara's door, my door, every day, their harassment relentless and creatively vicious. They didn't just shout insults. They accidentally splashed dirty water on her laundry. They mistook her for a stray and made shooing noises. Their curses were sharp and specific, honed by years of communal living. "Homewrecker. Have you no shame lying in another woman's bed? Some people are like flies, always buzzing around another's meal. Don't think your fainting act fools anyone. We see you for the snake you are." Some of the bolder ones, like Betty, even muttered darkly about ancient punishments. "In my grandmother's village they'd have put a woman like her in a pig cage and tossed her in the river," she'd say loudly enough for Clara to hear. Humiliated and terrified, Clara naturally ran to David in tears, and David, weak as ever against her performative distress, couldn't resist intervening. He would try to reason with the women, which only inflamed them further. The situation escalated daily, a noisy public spectacle that made our courtyard the talk of the entire district. The pressure became unbearable. David was trapped between the woman he felt compelled to protect and the entire social fabric of his community, which had unanimously condemned him. The higher-ups in his unit got wind of the scandal. A man whose domestic life was causing such public disruption was a liability. The breaking point came when a delegation of the neighborhood wives, led by Mrs. Gable, went to David's commanding officer. They laid out the entire sordid tale: the financial support of another woman over his own family, the attempted suicide, the public vow, the withdrawal from a national project for personal reasons. They spoke of my hard work and quiet suffering. They were my character witnesses, and their testimony was damning. Cornered, professionally embarrassed, and socially ostracized, David finally capitulated. He came home one afternoon, his face ashen, and silently handed me the divorce papers. He had already signed them. "The unit. They've advised it's for the best," he mumbled, unable to meet my eyes. I took the papers. There was no sense of victory, only a vast, echoing relief. "It was always you who pushed things this far," I said calmly. "I only went along with what you wanted." I went to the bedroom and picked up my single pre-packed suitcase. I was ready. I had been ready for months. As I walked toward the door, David finally found his voice, a hoarse, desperate sound. "What about Leo?" he asked. "Don't you care about your child at all?" I stopped and looked at him, at the man who had used our son as a weapon and a chain for so long. I felt a pang, not for the man Leo would become in this toxic environment, but for the innocent infant I had once held. But I could not save him without drowning myself. I answered with a cheerfulness that was only half feigned, a necessary armor against the pain. "From the moment we're born, we each have our own path to walk. Leo has his. Since you're staying here for your parents," I said, my gaze sweeping over Arthur's still form in the bed and Beatrice's blind, turned-away face, "you can look after him. There's nothing more to think about." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight, his eyes full of a torrent of words he didn't know how to say. Apologies, accusations, regrets. But I had no desire to hear any of them. "Leave me my dignity, David," I said, pulling my arm free. "Don't drag me down with your tears. You can't betray me and her both. You say you can't let me go, but I already let go of you." I walked out of the house, out of the courtyard, without a backward glance. Mrs. Gable and a few of the other women were waiting for me at the end of the street, their faces a mixture of sadness and fierce pride. They hugged me quickly, wished me well, and promised to keep an eye on things. I boarded the train heading northwest. It was a noisy, smoky beast filled with the hopeful and the ambitious, all of us leaving something behind for the promise of something new. As it began to chug out of the station, I saw a figure running along the platform. David. He was chasing the train, his face a mask of anguish, his hand outstretched as if he could pull me back. I did not wave. I did not shed a tear. I turned my face from the window and looked straight ahead at the vast, unfolding landscape. I only prayed the train would go faster, 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 carrying me away from the ghosts of my past and into the blank, hopeful page of my future. The train journey northwest was a baptism of soot and hope. 4 days, we rattled across the vastness of the country, the landscape outside the grimy window shifting from familiar greenery to a breathtaking expanse of yellow earth and stark, majestic mountains. The air grew drier, the sky wider. With every mile, the weight that had crushed my chest for a lifetime began to lighten. I was nobody's wife, nobody's daughter-in-law, nobody's overworked mother here. I was simply Lena Petrova, a worker for the Northwest Development Project. The base we arrived at was a raw, bustling settlement carved into the Luss Plateau. Barrack-style housing, dust everywhere, and a wind that carried the scent of earth and industry. It was austere, challenging, and to me it was paradise. I was assigned to a team managing logistics for the new machinery being brought in. The work was physically demanding, the hours long, but it was work for a purpose I believed in, and every ache in my muscles felt like a badge of honor, not a symptom of servitude. For the first few years I built a life of quiet, purposeful solitude. I shared a small, basic room with another female worker, a widow from Shanghai who had also come seeking a new start. We became fast friends, bonded by our shared pasts and our determination to forge a future. I learned to fix machinery, to read complex supply manifests, to lead a small team. The respect I earned was based on my competence and my work ethic, not on my ability to silently endure. It was intoxicating. I heard snippets of news from the old life through letters from Mrs. Gable. Her script was spidery but firm. David had married Clara within the year. The following year, a tragedy. Because of Clara's carelessness, a blocked ventilation flue left unchecked. Arthur and Beatrice had died in their sleep from carbon monoxide poisoning. My son Leo had died with them. The news was a distant, muffled explosion. I felt a profound, sorrowful emptiness for the boy I had known, but the pain was clean, devoid of the toxic bitterness that had characterized my past life. They were tragedies that belonged to another world, to people I no longer was. Mrs. Gable's letters grew more infrequent. She wrote that after the deaths, the army had restructured, and David was forced to transfer to a local factory. By a twist of fate so cruel it felt karmic, he ended up in the very position I had once held, overseeing the spinning machines at my old factory. As the state-owned enterprises struggled, the cotton mill's profits declined year after year, and David's wages dwindled. Clara, careless and extravagant, quickly began to resent their poverty. To give her the life she demanded, David, soft-hearted and proud, started taking on illegal, dangerous side jobs. But Claire was insatiable. She constantly whispered in his ear about other men making good money buying cars and refrigerators. David, pushed by her greed and his own wounded pride, drove himself harder and harder. 10 years passed in the Northwest. I grew from a simple worker to a shift supervisor, then to a deputy director of our sector. My life was my work and it was fulfilling. And then I met Anton. He was an engineer, a quiet, thoughtful man who had also come west to contribute. He had lost his first wife to illness and carried a gentle sadness that resonated with my own. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic passions. Our courtship was a slow, steady building of trust and companionship. He admired my strength and my mind. He never once expected me to serve him. We would cook meals together in the communal kitchen, our conversations easy and full of mutual respect. We married in a simple ceremony at the project headquarters. Because of our ages and our demanding work, we never had children and neither of us minded. We built a life of shared purpose and quiet affection. For the first time I understood what it meant to be in a partnership, to be cherished not for what I could do but for who I was. I spent 30 years in the West. 30 years of watching barren hillsides turn green, of seeing factories rise from the dust, of building something that would outlast me. Under Anton's unwavering support and through my own sheer will I rose through the ranks. I grew from a deputy director to the director of regional development for the entire Northwest sector. The little girl who had been told her only value was in servitude was now overseeing the livelihoods of thousands. With the changing times and the country's new focus, my expertise was needed back in the provincial capital. I was invited back to my home province to take a significant position on the State Resource Development Board, overseeing the development of mineral resources across the region. It was a triumphant return, a vindication I had never dared to dream of. Anton Ever my rock came back with me. We settled into a comfortable apartment in the city, our days calm and steady, filled with the quiet joy of a shared life well lived. The ghosts of my past were just that, ghost. They held no power over me anymore. My new role involved inspection tours to various industrial sites. It was on one such trip to a remote township coal mine that the past decided to pay a final unexpected visit. We were walking the site, a group of officials and managers, our shoes crunching on the coal-dusted ground. My eyes, trained to assess efficiency and safety, scanned the workers. And then I saw him. He was standing among a group of miners waiting for their shift, his head bowed. His skin was darkened by grime and sun, his hair, what little was visible under his cap, was completely white. His once upright frame was stooped and broken. And his left sleeve of his grimy work jacket was pinned up, empty. One arm was gone. The once proud soldier, the man whose righteous bearing I had once mistaken for strength, was now a hollowed-out shell, his eyes void of any light. He looked like nothing more than a man utterly worn down by time, regret, and hardship. It was David. I wasn't surprised. Mrs. Gable, in one of her last letters before she passed, had kept me informed. After I left, David's life had spiraled. The year I went west, he married Clara. The tragedy with his parents and Leo followed. A few years of strained marriage later, exhausted from years of back-breaking work to satisfy Clara's vanity, David had an accident at the factory. His arm was caught and mangled in a spinning machine, leaving him disabled. When he came out of the hospital, he was no longer the handsome man Clara had coveted. She began to despise him and soon got involved with a tailor from the county. Their affair was exposed right inside David's own home. He had hidden in a cupboard to avoid a confrontation, only to overhear their conversation. They spoke of his parents and Leo, and Clara, in a moment of cruel carelessness, revealed that she had deliberately blocked the flue, knowing the risk, wanting the burden of his parents gone. Something in David had finally snapped. He had grabbed a kitchen knife and killed Clara on the spot. Because of his prior military service and the extreme provocation, the court had shown leniency, sentencing him to 10 years. After serving his term, no one would hire a one-armed ex-convict. In desperation, he had gone to work at a coal mine, and there he had stayed for decades. As for Clara's daughter, after David went to prison, she had run off with a man and disappeared. I watched him for a moment from across the yard, this ghost from my deepest pain. I felt a profound, quiet sadness but no hatred. He was just a broken old man, living the consequences of every choice he had ever made. The inspection ended, and as our group prepared to leave, David stood beside the cars, his dim, wet eyes following me. He had recognized me. How could he not? I was the one who had gotten away, the one who had flourished in the soil where he had withered. I made a decision. I walked over, my heels silent in the cold dust. The officials with me hesitated, then hung back, sensing a private history. "Long time no see," I said calmly. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his scrawny neck. Tears brimmed in his red-rimmed eyes. "Long time no see," he echoed, his voice a hoarse, ruined thing. We looked at each other and found there was nothing more to say. Every possible word, apology, accusation, reminiscence, was buried under the mountain of the past. The chasm between us was too wide, too deep. I gave a slight, formal nod, then turned and got into the car. As we pulled away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, his figure growing smaller, until he finally collapsed to the ground, his body racked with sobs he could no longer contain. My husband, Anton, glanced back, his kind face puzzled. "What's wrong with that disabled man?" he asked. I looked straight ahead at the road leading away from the mine, away from the past. "Maybe life has just been too hard on him," I answered evenly. Anton nodded, a sigh of genuine pity in his voice. Yes, at his age, still working in a coal mine, it must be bitter. I thought to myself that coal miners' wages truly should be raised. It was a practical, actionable thought. Back in my provincial office, The memory of David's broken form fresh in my mind, I submitted a formal report and proposal on the living conditions and wages of coal workers across the state. It was not for him. It was for the countless others like him, for the simple dignity of labor. Not long after, the news came that their wages had indeed been increased. But along with that news came another, delivered in a brief, official memo from the township. David Petrova had committed suicide in the coal mine. My husband sighed with regret when I told him. Life was just about to improve. How could he not hold on? I let out a soft sigh, looking out my office window at the bustling modern city below. Perhaps not everyone is worthy of the blessings of a new era, I said quietly. His tragedy was complete, a final solitary act in a life that had been defined by choosing the wrong path, again and again. For me, however, the path ahead remained bright, clear, and entirely my own. The news of David's suicide was a final, quiet punctuation mark at the end of a long and painful sentence. I felt a complex swirl of emotions, a distant, residual sorrow for the young man he had once been, a profound pity for the broken figure he became, and a chilling clarity about the inevitability of it all. Anton, sensing my need for solitude, simply held my hand that evening, his silent presence a balm. He did not press, and I did not offer more. Some histories are too heavy to share in full. My work became my anchor. The report I had submitted on the coal miners led to a statewide review of resource extraction labor practices. I found a fierce, focused passion in this kind of advocacy, using my position to ease the burdens of those whose labor was so often invisible. It was a way to honor the struggle I had seen in David's eyes without being chained to his memory. I was not fixing his life. I was improving the systems that had failed him and countless others. Years melted into one another. Anton and I settled into a comfortable rhythm of mutual respect and deep affection. We traveled for my work, read together in the evenings, and built a life that was rich in peace, if not in dramatic passion. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for. The ghost of Leo, my son, would sometimes visit me in quiet moments. I wondered what kind of man he might have become, freed from the toxic influence of his father and a manipulative stepmother. I allowed myself to mourn the potential, not the reality, for the reality had been stolen from us both long before my rebirth. I retired from the State Resource Board at 70, leaving behind a legacy of tangible progress, safer minds, fairer wages, and a generation of younger officials I had mentored who carried the torch of pragmatic compassion. Anton and I moved to a small, comfortable house on the outskirts of the city, with a garden where he could indulge his love for roses and I could sit for hours with a book, the silence a welcome friend. It was in this tranquility that Mrs. Gable found me again, or rather, her daughter did. A neatly dressed woman in her 40s appeared at my gate one afternoon, holding a small, lacquered box. "Director Petrova?" she asked hesitantly. "My mother was phone Gable. She asked me to find you and give you this if I ever could." I invited her in, my heart thumping with a strange nostalgia. Over tea, she told me her mother had spoken of me often with a kind of proud reverence. "She said you were the one who got away," the daughter said with a gentle smile. "She said you showed all of us what was possible." After she left, I opened the box. Inside were a few faded photographs of the old courtyard and a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. The very letters I had written to Mrs. Gable in my first years in the Northwest. I had forgotten the raw pain and desperate hope in them. Beneath them lay a single newer envelope. In Mrs. Gable's shaky, final script, it was simply addressed, "For Lena." I opened it. The letter was short. "Lena, if you are reading this, I am gone and you have built the life you deserved. I have never stopped feeling I should have done more for you then. But I watched you through your letters and I saw you save yourself. You were the strongest of us all. Do not look back. There is nothing for you there. Your friend Fong." I cried then, quiet, cleansing tears for the woman who had been my first ally, for the past that was finally, completely laid to rest. The peace of my retirement was profound. Anton and I grew old together, our love a quiet, steady flame. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep a decade later, the loss was a deep ache, but it was not a devastation. We had said everything that needed to be said. We had loved fully and well. His absence was a presence in itself, a warm memory that filled the house. I lived another 10 years alone but never lonely. I had my books, my garden, and the occasional visit from former colleagues or the children of friends. My mind remained sharp, my spirit content. I had long since made peace with every choice, every twist of my fate. One afternoon as I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, a gentle, insistent pressure. It was not the seizing, bitter pain of my first death, but a slow, weary closing. I leaned my head back against the chair, a soft smile on my lips. My eyes fell on a single perfect red rose that Anton had planted, now in full bloom. I thought of Tommy's small trusting hand in mine a lifetime ago. I thought of the relentless whir of the factory machines, the dust of the Northwest, Anton's kind eyes, the weight of our official seal on a document that would change lives. I had endured betrayal and humiliation. I had known love and respect. I had built a life of consequence. The world began to softly fade at the edges, the colors of the sunset blending into a gentle, welcoming light. My last conscious thought was not of regret or of loss or of what might have been. It was a simple, profound certainty. This life, the one I carved with my own two hands and my own unyielding will, was enough. It was more than enough. And then there was peace. The young journalist assigned to write the obituary for former director Lena Petrova found the task daunting. The official record was impressive. A pioneer for women in industry, a key figure in Northwest development, a champion for labor reform. But she wanted the story behind the titles. She tracked down a few of Lena's oldest surviving colleagues. They spoke of a woman of formidable intelligence and unexpected warmth, a leader who remembered every name on her team. One, a retired engineer, mentioned a husband, Anton, a quiet man who had adored her. She had a past, you know, he said vaguely. A hard one. But she never let it define her. She was always looking forward. The journalist finally found a lead in an old community archive. A mention of Alina Petrova in the records of a now-demolished housing block, decades ago. There she found an elderly woman, one of the last residents waiting for relocation, who remembered. "Ah, Lena," the old woman said, her eyes misting over. "She was the one who left. There was a husband, David, a real piece of work. And that woman next door, Clara, a whole drama. It was a different time. But Lena, she got on that train and she never looked back. We all heard she did great things. We weren't surprised. She had that light in her even then. She showed every woman in that courtyard that there was a way out." The journalist combined the facts with the feeling. She wrote of a woman who had transcended the circumstances of her early life, not through luck but through sheer force of will. She wrote about Lena's legacy being not just in policies and projects, but in the quiet, unspoken inspiration she provided, a testament to the idea that it is never too late to choose yourself. The obituary was published on a bright, clear morning. It was a fitting tribute, accurate and respectful. But it could never truly capture the full journey, the searing pain of the first death, the steely resolve of the second chance, the quiet triumph of a life lived finally and utterly on her own terms. That story in its entirety belonged only to Lena. And she had taken it with her into a peace she had fought for, earned, and so richly deserved. The end.